Okay, this installment is going to be covering the causes of evolution, so you need to make sure that you've got this packet in front of you. Before I dive into that packet, though, I want to jump back to this whole Hardy-Weinberg equation that we've been working with the past couple of days, the p squared plus 2pq plus q squared. This guy, Godfrey Hardy and Wilhelm Weinberg, they both were working independently, and they said, hey, an equilibrium population is a group of organisms where from one generation to the next, the allele frequencies, my p's and my q's, don't change. And this then is an equation you can use to say, well, then how many of each of the three genotypes would exist in that population? The key stress meaning that they can't change from one generation to the next. Well, how can you maintain that where P's and Q's never change from one generation to the next? You can't have any mutation at all. There can't be something called gene flow where migration happens. Populations must always be very large. Mating has to be random, which means organisms can't be choosy about who they mate with. And then there's absolutely no natural selection, things like predation, competition, environmental changes. So if your face isn't scrunching like my face is scrunching, then let me tell you that this is not possible, which really means that Hardy-Weinberg shouldn't actually be used, but it's actually very helpful. So don't think that we've wasted our time. If we violate any of those 5 things, that means that our allele frequencies, our P's and our Q's, are going to change. Well, that's what evolution is. Evolution is the change of allele frequencies in a population gene pool over time. If your P's and Q's change from one generation to the next, evolution is happening. If they are staying the same, well, then right now they're not evolving. So what I'd like you to do is on your note packet, we want to say evolution equals the change, that's what my triangle means, the change of P's and Q's, which remember are the allele frequencies over time. It is possible for a change of allele frequencies, this is important, in a population of organisms over time. So we're looking at a specific population in a certain area and we're saying, hey, let's watch you over multiple generations. Are your P's and Q's changing? Hey, you're evolving. If they're not changing, well, you're not evolving right now. So, okay. The 5 factors that contribute to evolutionary change are these 5 listed on your packet. And then each page is going to focus on the 5. Okay? So, back to this. If the first factor is mutation, well, we know what mutation is. Mutation is the changes in a base sequence. In our DNA, our A's, T's, C's, and G's. So here, I've got recorded changes in the base sequence of the DNA in a gene. You can record that by your bullets on your note packets, or you can put it underneath the word mutation in the flowchart. Okay, but that's what a mutation is. I'm going to pop up all 4. Feel free to pause this so that you can fill in your ovals. And then I'm going to talk about each one. So go ahead and pause. Did you pause? You should pause because I'm going to say some good stuff. Okay. Mutations. At the very top, has usually little or no immediate effect, meaning that sometimes we don't see stuff right away. It might take a few generations before we actually notice. Okay. The source of new alleles. That's how we get our variation. New variations of a trait, thanks to mutations. We've said before that mutations can be helpful, harmful, or do nothing, especially if they're a substitution where it didn't really change an amino acid at all. Here's something important, is that mutation can only be passed to offspring if they are in cells that are going to result in gametes. Remember what gametes were? In humans, that was the sperm and the egg. In plants, it would be pollen and an egg. For humans, if we have a mutation that happens in our skin cells, that mutation is not going to be passed on to your children. But if mutations happen in your ovaries or your testicles, then those mutations have the ability to be passed on. Please write this on the bottom. Mutation does not happen because of environmental events, like the rock pocket mice. Those white mice or light-colored mice did not think to themselves, ooh, I should change my color to dark because now our ground is different. Nor can they say, oh, looks like a volcano's going to erupt. I should change my color. No, mutations are random. Mutations are random. Our mutation rate might increase based on other chemicals and things that affect our DNA, those mutagens, but we cannot cause a specific mutation to happen. Okay? This is an example of where they had at the very top, we have a bunch of bacteria that have never seen antibiotics before. So then we squirt some antibiotic on them. Let them grow. Many of our bacteria die, but there were a few of them who stayed alive because they had that superpower, probably in one of their plasmids, that said, hey, I've never seen this antibiotic before, but turns out I know how to break it down. Oh, okay. They didn't pick to have the antibiotic resistance. They randomly got it somehow, and it worked to their advantage when their environment was changed, well, by us. Second thing, gene flow. Gene flow focuses on this thing called migration. And migration is movement of alleles from one population to another. I'm going to fill in my ovals again so that you have a chance to write them down. Oops, I guess not. So we'll just do one. Immigration is one word that I need you to know. That's where alleles are added to a population. That's when organisms are coming into an area that they weren't before. If I have these two little kinds of mice in my population. No, take that back. Here's my original population up here. Here's some mice down here at the bottom that just tell you what the genotypes are. Let's say I have a group of dark-colored mice that move into town. They move into town, we end up with a new population where my homozygous recessive allele, that frequency goes up. So new neighbors, they're going to change your allele frequency. This is going to increase our diversity, which is a good thing. Emigration is going to be its opposite term. So you do need to make sure that you know the difference between immigration, meaning moving into an area that we're studying. Emigration would be a group of organisms that are leaving the area that we're studying. Remember, here's our little genotypes up here to tell you what's going on. If this is our original population and we've got certain mice leaving, the light-colored mice are leaving for whatever reason. I don't know why they would be leaving, but if they did, now our gene pool is changing, our frequencies are changing to where this is causing our little a, our recessive allele, to increase, which would be our Q, remember? And our P, frequency of our dominant allele, has gone down. Evolution has happened. Plants do this too. Plants release their pollen. All of my allergy people, you know this. And that pollen gets picked up by the wind and then transferred around. Well, that's how plants actually spread. That pollen's going to go and it's going to fertilize another group of plants. Well, and then those seeds, the seeds can be blown away, or they can be dropped in their fruit and eaten by animals, and then the animals eat them, go to a different area, poop, and now the seeds have been released into the ground. And so that plants can move too, which you don't think about, but they can. They can do migration. So the alleles can move even if the organisms can't. And really what we're doing is we're talking about our plants with our pollen and seeds. Hey, look at that. Didn't have to write it at all. What does this do? This reduces the differences in the gene pools when you're looking at two different populations, because things are moving back and forth. Do those populations then start looking more alike to each other? They do. And that would be its main effect. Here it says Google some examples of gene flow in nature. I recommend that you do that and then record those examples in that left-hand margin on that page. So you can go ahead and pause me and go out and look up some examples of those. But I'm going to move on to a small population size. With small population size, we have two examples called bottleneck and founder's effect. In genetic drift, we have a random change in allele frequencies. Remember, our P's and Q's brought about by chance alone. Genetic drift, if you look at these two graphs say, okay, here's my population size of 10,000. And you see that my lines of my dominant allele, they really don't change over the generations. Whereas if you look at my population size of 4, you're going to see that my change in my P and my Q changes very quickly. So this genetic drift is going to affect smaller populations more than it does the large ones. Large ones, our P's and our Q's are going to stay about equal. Two causes, something called population bottleneck and something called founder effect. Population bottleneck, the example that they give is you got this big bottle of different color marbles, but you've got this really skinny top of the bottle where when you try to pour out the marbles, you don't necessarily get all the same colors. And in this case, only 2 variations out of the possible 4. It looks like there's yellow, blue, green, and red. Only the yellow and the blue managed to survive for whatever reason. And so now the yellow and the blue are the only ones that are able to mate, giving you a change in your population of now you have a reduced diversity. Often this happens because of a natural catastrophe or us overhunting. And the big thing is that it's going to reduce our genetic variation as seen by the marbles. Here's a zoom in for you. Pause it if you'd like to read the different boxes. So with our bottleneck, you see I got a bunch of symbols in here. So lots of down arrows in pop size. So that's a serious decrease in population size. This symbol here, that's a geometry symbol. It means if and only if. And so I like to use it as a symbol that means caused by, as a shorthand. And what's it caused by? Natural catastrophe or overhunting. So I've just shortened the definition from my previous page. An example of this, the northern elephant seal. Yeah, in the 1800s, he was almost hunted to extinction. There were only 20 left by 1890. Then there was a hunting ban. So humans changed our ways, or we made laws, and that allowed the population to increase to 30,000. But the problem was, if you only had 20 individuals, what kind of variation existed? Not a whole lot. So when we look at the biochemical analysis, well, that just means like DNA fingerprinting. There's not a whole lot of difference across that whole population because there wasn't a lot of variety for mating to really make a difference. That means if there's an environmental change and they can't manage to survive, they won't manage to survive, possibly, which is unfortunate. The founder effect is the other kind of genetic drift. This picture always makes me chuckle, is that you have these poor little beetles that get carried away from their population thanks to something like wind, and they get blown to an island where none of their kind exists. Well, that's random. Who's going to get picked up by the wind? The red ones or the yellow ones? We don't know. Random. And so they end up on this island. Well, they can only mate with each other. Hopefully they're opposite genders. But then they're only going to have their type of variation. They're not going to have that variety of reds and yellows, especially if red is recessive and there's nothing else that could be there. Or if red is dominant and they happen to be both homozygous dominant. So that works. So founder effect. When a small number of individuals leave a large population and establish a new isolated population. Oop, there's my other one. If we have a group of goats where some of them decide to leave, and then there's some sort of flood that keeps them permanently separated, it's quite possible that that other population, those allele frequencies change enough to where now when they look at each other, they're like, are they the same species as us anymore? And that could end up separating that group that started as the same species, separate them into two separate ones. And we'll talk about that in a later discussion. In an Amish population, we've got children that if you count the number of digits, there's actually 6 of them. And if you look at mom's hands, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. She has 6 digits as well. And so there's a high population or a high frequency of 6-digitness in this Amish population. Non-random mating. Mating is never random. We're pretty choosy. And if we're non-random, meaning that we're choosy, well, we're going to change our genotypes just by choice. Most species are likely to mate with nearby members of their species, right? Proximity is important. Some species have a dominant male that mates with multiple females, so that's going to determine what those genotypes are going to be. And then there's something called assortative mating, where there's a preference, which seems kind of crummy, but that's like prejudiced almost. You like a specific kind. This goose only likes specific colored of geese. Awfully choosy. Where there's examples here, again, I'd like you to look up, do a Google search, and get some examples of each. Natural selection. All genotypes are not equal. Some are more favored than others. And that depends on what the environment or the location of this population is at the time. Penicillin started being used in World War II, and it killed many of the bacteria. The bacteria, not all of them were killed because some of them had an allele, probably in their plasmid, that actually had the ability to kill the penicillin. Penicillin is actually a fungus. And so now these bacteria that had the ability to survive penicillin, they're the ones that survived, and they were the ones then that started infecting people. And then there was no way to cure them. So we go back to our little bacteria example here, and this one is streptomycin resistant. Well, so you've got some that are penicillin resistant, you've got some that are streptomycin resistant. We have amoxicillin now. Well, what happens when we start running out of antibiotics? Interesting. You'll be watching a video later on that's going to show examples of this. Natural selection does not cause mutations in individuals. Remember that. It doesn't cause mutations. It's just going to influence which mutations are more advantageous. Natural selection might act on individuals. Things like predation, right? You're going to be able to capture the weak. But overall, it's going to change populations. And so that's what you need to remember, is that when we're talking about evolution, we were talking about, okay, yes, we're going to affect individuals because of the environmental stresses, but it's how does that affect the population as a whole? Because it's that population of a whole is reflected in the next generation. Okay, although penicillin acted on individual bacteria, as a population of bacteria, they became penicillin resistant, and that was their evolution of that species of bacteria. Here's what evolution isn't. It's not intended to make organisms better. Evolution is just, hey, what's happening in the environment around, and how is that affecting giraffes? Why do giraffes have longer necks? Well, because it has a couple of advantages. Number one, it can reach further up for food, and it allows for more successful fighting for dominance. So again, what is evolution? Change in allele frequencies of a population. We have that written at the top of our note packet. And then it's a response to the current environmental factors. Evolution is the change in allele frequencies in a population, and then how does that population respond to the environmental factors? That can change at random. So we have a compromise between opposing pressures. If you look at these giraffes, okay, the long necks might be good for fighting, but Look at how awkward that is for getting water. And when a lion comes up and attacks it, that's not so cool. And that'll do it for this round of notes. Thanks.